Okay, let's begin. We're still in the sequence of activities for the movement phase, and we have done the artillery fire phase. Now we're into phase 3, the combat fire phase. And it basically says, introduction, units of both sides may fire at opposing units which are adjacent. Non-phasing units may perform a limited movement. Interesting. The Union has been called by the primary commander to attack the CSA. The Union will soon be out of the influence of the primary commander in range. And once that happens, the Union will have to move using the allotment table. The artillery pieces can move 6. They're free agents. However, whether in column or in battle line, if they elect to stay with the brigade and join in with the brigade's activity, they will have to move with the same amount of allotment as the brigade to stay in unison. Artillery pieces cannot take disorganization. They're immune from it. Instead, they get their ammo boxes marked off. However, there is a rule that, again, if the artillery pieces decide to stay with the brigade, whether in column or battle line, limbered or unlimbered, whatever disorganization this brigade gets, the artillery that's involved with them will be restricted in movement and activity as well. So they're using the allotment table and they're moving along until they get to this point. They have artillery up front, unlimbered. Their range of influence reaches to the CSA's artillery. They decide to fire. Once they have exchanged volleys, they can take their batteries and limber them up. Or they can leave them as is. The Union has the burden to show faith that after announcing that they're going to attack the CSA brigade, they must move. They must show effort to get over there and become adjacent. Even if one marker reaches the CSA brigade, the objective is good. If they do not show any effort, then they can no longer be called an attacking brigade, and they lost that advantage. So after these artillery pieces fire, the Union decides to limber up, roll for the allotment table, and move towards can't do that, there we go, and move towards the CSA. The defender, which is the CSA, gets to fire first, then the attacker. Now, the CSA infantry can't do anything right now except wait. They are provided with limited movement. In other words, they can arrange up to 2 hexes any way they like, if needed, to set up their defense. Most of the time, if they have extra strength markers, they can set them up as such. Move to here or anywhere. Anything to back it up. Although all markers without a counter is considered to be 8 strength points. It could be very well that this unit needs help, so it could do this. But the defense gets to move a little bit in order to organize its defense. Now, while the U.S. is advancing, the artillery in front of the CSA can still fire against the advancing units. As the units move forward, they're taking hits from the artillery of the CSA. And with that comes damage and disorganization. It's possible that the U.S. may be disorganized in points where the attack stops and they can no longer attack. In any case, once the U.S. gets close, remember the 2-point movement for the defense can set up as well. They don't want to get adjacent to those markers unless they're protected by their own men. And then we flip them over. And now they've got a pretty good defense. Of course, again, the defender gets to fire again, but this time they're adjacent in combat fire. They can fire their artillery into the infantry or cavalry, or they can fire their artillery on artillery. we'll get into that later. It's pretty in-depth. The U.S. can fire their artillery into the infantry. They can fire their artillery into the artillery. And of course, the battle line markers get to fire at the other battle line markers. So all units can fire. There's several ways to fire. You can have selective, or artillery fires at artillery, and the infantry battle line marker fires at the infantry battle line marker. Or you can do in any combination in any ways. You can even do this. Or you can have them all fire. One on each. Two on one. Anything like that. Sooner or later, the line is going to break down and get weak. If this happens, then the advantage player can use the breakdown table when they score hits. And the breakdown table is a way to help whittle down the opponent. Once the allotment table and the breakdown table have been used, and you basically, because of the breakdown table, have beaten a hole in one of the weaker lines, you can do what is called an assault. And we'll get into assault in the next video. But the whole purpose of this is to weaken the line, find a hole, assault, and get through the enemy line so they retreat. And they'll all have to retreat together because they're one brigade. Of course, if the assault fails, then the attacker retreats. And we'll get to retreat a little later. But the disorganization that accumulates from the retreat is brutal, I assure you. Okay, I hope this as a quick introduction to the combat fire was clear enough. Again, don't worry, we'll go into it in more depth and more detail when we get to that section of the rule book. Keep gaming.